It is.
Everything. I know, everything there, even the candy that they
Yep.
sell or whatever, the extra stuff, it's all.
My granddaughter made a lemon meringue pie, so I said to her, I'll get you some lemon meringue ice cream to put on your lemon meringue pie. Of course, getting it to Israel, it would melt, but.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Lois.
Hi.
Good evening.
Is that Sarah?
No, it's Lois.
No, I believe it's also Sarah Kleinman.
Ooh,
Sarah,
Mazel tov.
what a joy. Mazel tov, Sarah.
Hi, Rabbi Cars. It's so good to see you.
I hope you're not filming that from a funeral home right now. Is that from a funeral home?
No. I'm at Park Plaza.
Oh, okay.
I do some work at Park Plaza also.
Nice.
It's nice to see everyone.
Who's
It's
running
nice
the
to
show
see
at Park Plaza?
Hi, everyone. Wow, a nice turnout.
My friend.
Very good. Good to see you.
Very good to
Regards
see
to your beautiful wife and family.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, we'll give it like one more minute and then we'll start. And there's Steve. Hey, Steve.
I can still see. It's a miracle.
It's very good to see you. It's been a long time. It's been at least 3 nights. What has it been? About 2 nights.
About 2 nights, right?
And that was a beautiful event, and you did a great job.
Thank you. Glad you were able to come.
It was my honor to be there. It was heartfelt, well organized, everything carefully scripted and well done.
Were we at the same place?
We were, and I can tell you I appreciated it. Okay. In the past, we've talked about the fact that it is the lot of human beings on this planet to guess. There are a lot of moments in our life, even very important moments, where we're not sure what it is that we're supposed to do. We're not sure what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And yet we are supposed to act. There are times when even the wisest people are not able to give you guidance. People with the greatest life experience that you've gone to for advice on so many issues, and then you get to something and they have nothing for you, or their advice is that you got to step up and make the right decision. Even like, for instance, one of the classic cases is going to come up, not in this week's Torah portion, but at the end of the Torah portion of Chukas with Pinchas. Pinchas is going to make a decision to kill Zimri and Cosby. And we're told that it was one of these decisions where if he had gone for advice, they would not have given him the advice to do what he did, but he needed to do. It was the right thing to do what he did. So it's like if somebody comes for consultation in a scenario like Pinchas, where you're supposed to stand up in the moment and sort of be the person, you specifically have to do it on your own. We've talked about Avraham, how Hashem gives Avraham minimal direction, minimal direction. He like, go to the land which I will show you. He doesn't lay things out. There's not a plan that he has some map of that is going to clearly lay out all the steps he's supposed to take, all the rules he's supposed to follow as he goes forward. He's given like these general directions, which are mysterious. He's told at one point, you're going to be the father of a great nation, and they're going to be in this land. He's not told when that's going to happen. He's not told how that's going to happen. He doesn't have children when he's first told it. Not only does he not have children, there's no way he's going to have children. And yet he's being told he's going to be the father of a great nation. And as it unfolds, it's like, he's looking around, maybe it's Lot, who's going to be the one that takes over. Then it becomes clear it's not Lot. Is it going to be Eliezer, his chief of staff, his loyal servant? No, it's not going to be Eliezer. Is it going to be Ishmael, his son born of Hagar? Eventually, no, it's going to be Yitzchak. Then he's told to sacrifice Yitzchak. It's like at each step of the way, it's left mysterious for him. And there are times when he's supposed to act, like when he goes down to Egypt and he tells Sarah, tell them you're my sister, don't tell them you're my wife. We're told by the Ramban, Nachmanides, afterwards that was a mistake. How would he know that that's a mistake or not a mistake? There's a judgment call. He's expected to somehow have come to the right judgment in that place. Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, he famously says it was a mistake for him to do that, to put Sarah at risk. But the Ramban is a late person to have said that. There's no medrash on that. There's no Gemara that says that. Nachmanides is the one who says it. And Nachmanides is a very important scholar. We take his word for it. But you have these moments in life, and you're given a lot of freedom to act, and you're expected to make decisions without certainty. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the rabbinic leader of the Jewish people right while Jerusalem is under siege. I mean, he's been the rabbinic leader for a while, but he's the rabbinic leader at the time when Jerusalem's under siege. He's going to have been the rabbinic leader of the people when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. He's one of the great, most important, pivotal scholars and leaders of the Jewish people in history. It's funny because if you go to Tiberias, there is a cemetery there, which is identified as the cemetery where the Rambam is buried. And it is, in fact, where the Rambam is buried. His body was brought there at some point, and he's buried there. And it's sort of weird because it's right in town. It would be like, if you had, like in downtown Chicago, you had one, like a really famous burial place.
Next to the bean.
Right, like something like that, where you could just walk up from town and you end up in the cemetery. Anyways, it's identified as the Rambam Cemetery. It's been refurbished. And somebody recently told me it was the most moving part of a trip he took, was to go to the Rambam Cemetery. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is buried in that cemetery. And the Rambam would be humiliated and embarrassed that they call it the Rambam Cemetery when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is buried there. The Rambam is maybe like 900 years after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, again, he is one of the people who guaranteed the continued existence of the Jewish people as a nation with a mission after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, during and after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So there's a story about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which is that he, at the end of his life, right at the end of his life, his students are there, and he tells them he's not sure where he's going. It's used as a cautionary story that even great people are not sure if they're going to Gan Eden. In other words, they're going to good judgment, or he's going to bad judgment. What his lot's going to be after he dies. The assumption is there's some kind of judgment, and he's not sure, even as he's about to die, which way he's going. So we're cautioned to remember that even to the last day, to understand that your every decision matters to your last breath, and never to take for granted that you're doing well. Remember one time I was listening on Fresh Air, Terry Gross interviewed one of the authors of this series of books about the end of time. There's these kind of fictionalized, based on scripture, but fictionalized books that are sort of based on Christian scripture, about the end of days. And so she's interviewing these authors, and apparently within the evangelical world, they're bestsellers. And so she asked one of them, are you confident that you will go to heaven after you die? And he said, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, his faith tells him that if you believe in the Savior, that you're going to be saved. You're going to go to heaven. And so he has absolutely no doubt, not a bone, and she was sort of prodding it, nothing, no doubt, not at all, not at all. So right after I heard that, I was listening in the car, and then we had a class at somebody's office, and there were maybe 12, 15 guys, and there was Rabbi Matti Berger was there, and he was, so it was before he presented whatever he was there to present, and I brought it up, that conversation. And then he says to the group, he goes, let's say I had Adolf Hitler here and Mother Teresa. So he said, which one of those two would be absolutely certain about what's going to happen after they die? Hitler would be absolutely sure about what he's going to die. But was just this, but we are trained to, and that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai story is part of the training, not to be certain. Now, how could it be that you're not certain? How could it be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not certain? So very likely the reason Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not certain, one of the examples of why he might not have been certain is because as a leader of the people, he's called upon to make decisions in situations where there is uncertainty. So for example, there was a moment when he was speaking to Vespasian. Vespasian was the Roman general as the city was under siege. He was a great Roman general who then became the emperor. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai called him the emperor before he was the emperor. And so the story is that while it was considered impudence because he wasn't. And then message came to him that he had just been appointed in absentia, that he was now the emperor. So anyways, during that conversation, Vespasian said, give me 3 requests. I'll grant you 3 requests. So he asked for that the Romans do not kill Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the Nasi, the titular head of the Jewish people at the time. He asked that he allow the Sanhedrin and the scholars to convene in Yavna under protection. In other words, that they wouldn't be harmed, so that they could continue the scholarly work of the Jewish people. And he asked that Rav Tzadok, who was a very holy man who had been fasting, be healed by Roman physicians. Those were his three requests. He did not ask that they spare the Beis HaMikdash. Why doesn't he ask them to spare the Beis HaMikdash? Because he makes the judgment in the moment that they won't. And he can't waste a request on something that he won't. And he also can't raise their ire and then they'll say they're not going to give any request. So he has to make a judgment on the spot. What is he going to ask for? And then forever after, as many years as he lived after, he would always have to wonder what would have happened if I asked for it. Would they have granted it? Those are the kind of positions that leaders are put in, but it's also the kind of position that we're put in all the time. And you can't just, like, there are some people who assume that they've created such a scheduled square of the world to live in, such a rigidly organized and ruled square to live in, that they believe that it is possible to have life where you can just look it up. Whatever it is, you can look it up. And there'll always be somebody to ask so that you can. So for instance, if you're a chassid, then you're always going to be just able to ask the Rebbe, what does the Rebbe say to do? And the Rebbe will tell me what to do. And that may work for many people's lifetimes, but it didn't work before the Shoah. There were many people who went to their Rebbes before the Shoah and they said, I don't know what to tell you. Should I go to America? Should I go to Israel? What should I? And there are records of many Rebbes who just said, I don't know. There's no guidance at this moment. So even in a system which seems to be rigidly guided, where every decision can be made for you, even there's not a guarantee. And also, by the way, within your everyday, the dynamic of your family, or within the everyday dynamic of your community, within the everyday dynamic of your business, there are times where you have to stand up and make decisions in the moment where you don't have access for somebody else to tell you what to do. You can't call Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or somebody else and have them tell you exactly what to do in those things. And then you have to stand up and you have to make the decision. And this is not just true in what we would call the more mundane areas of life, but this is true in your religious life as well, that it is not always clear. So when our Torah portion, which is Korach, when you have these people who are standing up to Moshe, they present as if they are standing up about what God wants. Because Moshe, several times during this confrontation, says, now you're going to see that God chose this. What happened was what God wants. Now you're going to see what God wants. So it seems like that's what the argument's about. The argument's about what does God want. So how could that be unclear? How could that not be clear? What does God want? And I remember years ago, 40-something years ago, one of my teachers, Rabbi Meltzer, may he live long and good health, Rabbi Shmariel Meltzer, I remember him asking this about Korach. Like, how would you pick? How would you know? We are reading after the fact. Okay, Moshe's our hero. Korach's the enemy. That's how. If you're in day school, if you're a little kid in day school, that is what you're told straight off. Korach's the bad guy, Moshe's the good guy. But if you lived in that time, how do you know? Now you could say, I just decide to do whatever Moshe says. I'm going to do whatever Moshe says, right? If Moshe says it. But again, there are so many times where uncertainty is there, where you're asked to step up, where you're and you're not sure. You're not sure. Even if you would say, I'm always going to do what Moshe says, there's going to be times when Moshe says something to you and it just doesn't seem right to you. It doesn't seem right. Even though they've been reliably there for you, he's been reliably there for you over and over and over, there's going to be times where it doesn't seem right. Now, the challenge for you in those situations very likely would be, I got to do it even though it doesn't seem like it's right. But that's hard to do. And again, because you're nowadays, if you want to know what to do every moment of your day, you could find a book that'll tell you. You can find a book, it'll tell you.
Google me a schedule.
Right. And you could work out a schedule based on those books, a sefer I'm talking about, even a halachic work. You could find something that will outline for you what you should do, all day long until, something happens with your kid, or something happens with your parent, or something happens with a friend, or there's some problem in the community, and then suddenly everything is thrown into disarray. And now you're not sure. If two friends of yours are getting divorced, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to, and they're not talking to each other, and you've got to pick one or the other who's gonna, and so who am I supposed to pick, or am I supposed to pick, or these kinds of things suddenly emerge, and then suddenly your rule book just doesn't help you. And if you and you need to step in, or your child is having a confrontation with their teacher. Your child's having a confrontation with their teacher. So on the one hand, you need them to respect their elders, you need them to respect their teacher, but on this particular thing, you're not sure if that's the ethic, what the teacher did or what the teacher said. Is that going to be something? So again, you suddenly find yourself stepping in, or sometimes you're just told by a wise mentor, you need to step up and take charge. You need to be the leader of the family. Your children are looking to you for leadership. Your family's looking for you for leadership. There is no guidance on how to step into that moment. And it's going to involve making decisions. How am I to know to make those decisions? And this scenario is that. This scenario is, you have a lot of people and they're not sure what to do. When I've had, as I got older, I would have it presented to me by my teachers or in text that Korach is not the bad guy you think he is. He was a great man. He was a person of stature. He was a righteous man. That because they want you to understand that this moment of choice would have been difficult for anybody. It's characterized as great men are following him, and the others. The great men, it says, "Vayakumu fnei Moshe va'anoshim mipnei so 250 nisiei eda." They are the leaders of the community. Kriye Moed, Anshe Shem. These are the people that get called when there's big events happening. They're the ones who represent. They are people with great reputations. Anshe Shem, they're people of great names. They have great reputations. This was not just a bunch of Dasan and Aviram. You hear Dasan and Aviram's about that. That was Edward G. Robinson. I forgot who played Aviram, but Edward G. Robinson was Dasan in the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. And so, maybe you already knew that those guys are not great people, but Korach and these, something happened, these 250 people. And by the way, those 250 people, they are challenged by Moshe to take incense pans. They take these pans that have hot coals on them, and incense is going to come out of them. They're all going to stand there, and if God chooses them, then they were right. But if not, they're going to die. These people are going to die, and they did die, which was an indication that they were wrong. But then those pans were picked up. Every one of those pans was picked up. They were copper. They were eventually pounded into copper kind of matting, and they were used to cover the Mizbeach so that it was now a copper altar, the Mizbeach. And the copper came from their fire pans. Now, and we're told that it was because they brought them close. Now, it's also meant to be a cautionary story, that you have to be careful how you try to come close. But also that there is something about these pans that is sanctified, is holy, because they were trying to come close, which suggests that even if they're very wrong, they were also, there was a part of them, at least some aspect of them, that meant the right thing. They meant well. So there are again, it's not like it's always that there isn't anybody to talk to. Most of the time there is somebody to talk to try to give you some objectivity in the situation. But there are going to be a lot of times when there isn't. Now, the other issue is that, and this is something that can be a bit of a struggle. So let's say this is the case, and that there are moments that are where the instructions are given, and those you know what to do. But there's these big spaces where there's not, and you're given freedom to sort of figure it out on your own. So now you've gone about life and you've developed this ability to live in those unknown moments, and that engenders a kind of a sense of independence, a belief in yourself, and a belief in your instincts, a belief in your intuition, a belief in your decision-making ability. And then you run up. This is another problem that can happen. So your first one is those blank spaces. What do I do with them? But now let's say you've acclimated yourself to the blank spaces, and you've really developed a way in them, which requires self-reliance and a sense of self-worth and valuing your decision making. Now, let's say you come up against something where you feel it should go one way, but the rule is that it goes another way. This is that challenge where, on the one hand, you're meant to develop what we'll call yourself, but on the other hand, you're meant to show deference. So there's what's called bittul, deference. You show deference, and that's once you've done one well, it's very hard to do the other. Bittul means deference, to show deference. So let's say there's a rule and you think it's a dumb rule, but it's a rule. and you understand the system, and the rule was done according to the system. It came out from the system. And you don't deny the integrity of the system, but the system put out a dumb rule. So now this is how you're interpreting it. It may not be dumb at all. In fact, the assumption is that if it's, a rule that's expressed by the Torah or by a sage, it's not dumb. But you may feel it was dumb, or you may feel it came out of nepotism, or you may feel it came out of some human weakness, that this person came up with the rule or this interpretation of the rule. So, but now you have to show deference. There are several cases of this described even in the Talmud, where somebody is certain the rule is not right, but he has to show deference. One of the classic cases in the Talmud is Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua is one of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he's of that next generation, and he's one of the great leaders of that next generation. He's a member of the Sanhedrin, and he's not just a member of the Sanhedrin, he's a leadership figure. He taught many of the other people that are on that Sanhedrin, and he himself was a great leadership figure. So the actual head of the Sanhedrin was Rabbi Gamliel. He's the Nasi. He is the Nasi was a position, it's often translated as prince of the people. So what happened was, up until about the 300s, somewhere in the 300s, close to 400 of the Common Era, the way we've determined Rosh Chodesh, we're about to have Rosh Chodesh. The way they determined Rosh Chodesh is the new moon was you actually had witnesses who saw the first emergence of the new moon. And they would report it to the Sanhedrin, and then the Sanhedrin would declare that it's the beginning of the new month. That's how it had to be. That's how it's laid out. So what happened was 2 witnesses came and said they saw the new moon, and based on that, they declared the new moon. Now, it happened to be a very cloudy time. Like, if it's a clear sky, everybody sees the beginning of the new moon. 2 guys are chosen to actually report to the Sanhedrin, but everybody sees it with their own eyes. It's the new moon. But it was a cloudy night, and they had a moment of clearing the clouds or whatever, and they were able to see it, but they're the only 2 coming forward. They came forward, they testified they saw the new moon. And the thing is, they know approximately when there's supposed to be a new moon, and this was a little bit early. But they came and they saw the new moon, so they declared the new moon. Then it was a clear night the next night, and there's no moon, which means they could not have seen the new moon. It doesn't go backwards. Mm-hmm. So that means a mistake was made. So the question is what to do about the mistake. So Rabbi Gamliel had charts. He had, studying the moon and the stars and the planets was something that was done for thousands of years before then. People were pretty good at the moon. They knew the moon well. But anyways, there were charts. He had some way to justify the decision that it was Rosh Chodesh the day before. And because of that, he wouldn't change it. He wouldn't change it from the decision they made before. Reversing a decision like that could cause a lot of reverberation. Once they've decided when Rosh Chodesh is, things are on the move, especially that month, because that month was Tishrei and Rosh Chodesh was Rosh Hashanah. And in a few days, they're having Yom Kippur, and then they're having Sukkot. So everything's in motion. It's a very big thing in motion. And plus, if you're concerned about, how lahavdil, but how people speak of losing faith in the Supreme Court,
Yeah,
and what that means for the country if people don't have faith in the Supreme Court. Imagine if they didn't have faith in the decision making of the Sanhedrin.
Oy.
So Rabbi Gamliel makes the decision, we're not going to change it. Rabbi Yoshua was adamant against it. It was clearly wrong. And it and you could see the arguments going back and forth about this. But the decision was made based on Rabbi Gamliel that they're going forward with it as it was. But because Rabbi Yoshua had given such a vigorous opposition to it, Rabbi Gamliel required Rabbi Yoshua to show up on the day that, according to in other words, if you had changed it, so Yom Kippur would have been, let's say, a day later, okay? So everybody celebrated Yom Kippur on the Yom Kippur. Everything went on in the, as it would on Yom Kippur. And then the next day would have been Yom Kippur, according to the way, if they would have changed it. Rabbi Gamliel made Rabbi Yoshua come out in public and demonstrate that he was not keeping Yom Kippur that day. In other words, that he was, in fact, eating, or he came in with his money belt and his staff and everything to show that he was not treating that day as Yom Kippur publicly. And he did it. So now there was backlash, even in the Sanhedrin, there was backlash against it because they felt it was too much. It was too much of a humiliation of him. But he did it. Those moments where somebody is absolutely sure you're wrong. You could not be surer that it was wrong. And he's part of the decision-making body, but then he's brought out to show his deference, and then he does show his deference. He shows his deference. That's like an extreme example of what is asked of us. But this comes up many times in our lives where we're certain we're right. We're absolutely certain we're right, but we're asked by the system, or we're asked by leadership, or we're asked by a mentor to do something that is different than what we think is right, and we're expected to show deference. And this is important practice, because for whatever reason, God in his infinite wisdom created a universe that has rules and laws. And we all need some kind of training to show deference to those rules and laws. It doesn't matter if somebody sticks their finger into a light socket or throws an electric appliance into the bath while they're bathing. It doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person, that you meant to do it or you didn't mean to do it, you get electrocuted. That is a law of the universe. And just like that's a law of the universe, Shabbos is a law of the universe, and tefillin is a law of the universe, and there's all sorts of things that are built into the system. What we call the mitzvos and the branches of those things, our understanding is that they are built into the fabric of the universe. In other words, it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, when you're thinking about the spiritual, how could it be contained in the finite? How could something mundane and finite be of any consequence to God? And especially if it looks silly, or if it looks wrong, or if it looks whatever, how can they be? But somehow we are called to show deference to it. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, when they bring their fire pans, like these people, we're led to understand that they had the best intent. The only thing was, Moshe had already warned, based on God's direction, you can't veer from how this works. If you veer from how this works, death will happen. And they veered from how it was supposed to work, and they died. there's a part of us that wants to believe that because the spiritual world is infinite and God is infinite, that therefore it doesn't, you can't have these finite things. But just like you have gravity, and it will not, it's a law. Richard Feynman, there's the tapes of Richard Feynman giving these 6 lectures at Caltech. And he, at one point, he's standing with a pendulum next to a pendulum that will kill him if it hits him. And he pushes the pendulum, and he stands there, and it doesn't come back to him. And he says, he makes the point, I stand here with certainty that it's not going to hit me, because that law of gravity is a law. It's a law. It works, always works like that. An object that's projected, if somebody's firing a gun, it will lower 16 feet every however many, etc. It always will, because that gravity is that's how laws of work. And there are things like that, that we are instructed. There's things like that in the spiritual world. You may not look to your eyes right now like that thing's working, but that's a law. It will work. It will result in what it says it's going to result. You may not be able to time it, but it will work. It's supposed to wait. If it's reward, there will be reward. If there is a negative that's supposed to happen, the negative will happen. These are laws like those other things are laws. And the problem is when you're up against, especially when you're in that infinite mode, that you're engaging the infinite, it's very hard to show deference to rules or finite structure. Rav Kook, there's a sitter of Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who was the chief rabbi of Israel and was, like over the past 100 years, there have been some very great teachers that have influenced the generation. He is one of those kind of people. Like there was Lubavitcher Rebbe, and there was Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, and there were quite a few people, Rav Aaron Kotler and Lakewood. There are people that you could point to that became just the kind of wisdom point of large groups of people. So Rav Kook is one of those. He's a very, very influential thinker. And so there's a sitter called Olat Re'iyah, which is a sitter that includes the teachings of Rav Kook on the sitter. He actually wrote a commentary on the sitter, that's part of it, but it also begins with essays from Rav Kook. And Rav Kook makes this point. He says at one point when you're davening, you have to honor the system. That's why you'll see in our davening discussion, sometimes you see discussion of the planets and the stars and all sorts of things. And you may even see reference to angels and stuff. These are kind of symbols of the system, but also a recognition that there's a system. There's a way you approach God. There are channels to reach God. If you try to approach God directly without going through the proper channels, it's almost like that. If you try to reach God directly without going through the proper channels, you're not reaching God at this point of prayer. There's definitely prayer, which is unscripted, and you're allowed to say whatever you want to God directly, etc. But during especially organized prayer, there's a recognition that there's some kind of system, and we honor that system in our prayer. You don't just go to infinite. That's why you see the Sidurim, you see these prayer books that have intents in them, or kavanot, intents, kavanas, because they are an acknowledgement to the fact that there is a system in the universe, and part of that system is even how things come down, how energy comes down, and how it goes back up. And you could find people that just resist that because that can't be. But for some reason it is. For some reason there's gravity. For some reason there's the laws of thermodynamics. And there are these other laws, and these other channels, and they truly exist, and they need to be recognized and honored and shown deference to. So again, on the one hand, we are trained in our life to develop our sense of self and trust in our decision making, especially in those moments where clear direction isn't available. And so that has to emerge. We have to be willing to, at some point, trust ourselves. Even Avram is saying to God at one point, this does not seem to be according to your system of justice, what he tells him he's planning to do to Sodom. And God is showing us a discussion between him and Avram about this. We're meant to step in and we're meant to express, but then when we find out what it is, then we're meant to show deference. At some point, he's going down the arguments, and then that's it. God goes ahead and destroys Sodom, and Avram at some point stops arguing. In other words, he is showing the deference that he made his points. God even agreed with the basic points, but he said, this isn't the case here, this isn't the case here, this isn't the case here, and then Avram stops. We're meant to be trained to do that, but which requires a great faith and trust in your own judgment about what is right and wrong, and then at the same time be able to have what's called bittul, deference, and to step back. Even when I'm sure I'm right. And these people were sure they were right. And they were great people. And they were leaders. And there were many times when they had to rely on it when everybody else doubts them around, because that's what happens with leaders. So this has been tested many times, where they're making a decision and everybody around them doubts them, and then they have to stay with it, because that's what leaders have to do. And every one of us is in a position of leadership at some points in our lives where we've had to do that, which means that you've developed a great sense of trust in your idea of what is right and wrong. And now you're bumped up against something and it looks wrong, but you're supposed to show deference, because that's also part of it. You can't be smarter than it. You can't be smarter than it. If you think you're smarter than it, and if you refuse to show deference to it, Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, he thought he had outsmarted it. Kings aren't supposed to have too many wives. Kings aren't supposed to have too many horses. Kings aren't supposed to do, whatever it was that Shlomo he made decisions, and he thought he had figured it out, or he's smarter than it, or it didn't make sense in his case. And he doesn't show deference, and it undermines everything he built. The empire is eventually split because of the results of his mistakes over here. So it's this balance between trusting in oneself and having deference at the same time. You have to be able to do both. You have to be able to not just to trust yourself, but when everybody doubts you, you have to be standing there. And that requires such work to be able to do that. And then you've done it, and you've built yourself to this place, and you're sure you're right. And then you have to be able to show bittul. That ultimately you have to be able to show bittul. There is a system. There is the way things work. And if you're butting up against it, you're butting up against gravity. Okay, I am grateful for having this opportunity. I look forward to gathering again next week. If that works for you guys, that works for me. Be well. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Sippy, good luck.
I will.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lars.
Be well, guys. Be well. Be well.